Hey YouTube, how you doing? I'm out here in rural Texas. There's no office here at this cemetery. But the first thing I notice is this fence row has names of those who are buried here. And I'm looking for Max Causey. So I see Causey right here. So logic would tell you that most likely he's in this section. Sometimes you gotta be a detective looking for grave sites. Anyway, as I look through the fence, Max and Rosemary Causey are buried right here. So what I'll do is I'll walk around the fence and share the story with you. 1964, Max Causey serves as a foreman of the Jack Ruby trial. You may know, I'm sure, that Jack Ruby was convicted of murder for shooting Lee Harvey Oswald in the basement of the Dallas Police Department building. This happened November 24th, 1963. So again, the trial was in 1964. Max Causey, he's living in Garland, Texas, which is just northeast of Dallas. He's married to Rosemary. They have 2 young children. It's a nice brick home. He's got a nice job. He's got a college degree and he's working as an engineer for a corporation right there in Dallas. Living life happily ever after, but one day goes to the mailbox like a lot of us and gets a jury summons. His first thought was, gee whiz, how can I get out of this deal? Like a lot of us. And I thought for sure he would get dismissed. Well, he ends up going down to the courthouse. The courthouse is located in downtown Dallas, right there at Dealey Plaza. Ironically, that is where President Kennedy was assassinated. And so he walks into the jury room, and in this room it's just packed, and his immediate thought in his mind was, I'll get out of this deal. There's no way they're going to select me. There's no way. What happens in Texas, like a lot of states, is the defense and the prosecutors, in this particular case, they would get 24 reject cards, meaning that for whatever reason they can reject the potential juror. So Belli had used about half of them already, and Max is in the jury room for several hours. They finally call his name, and he goes in to the courtroom, and he's questioned for an hour and a half by Melvin Belli. And he's quite surprised. Here's his grave now. Max E Causey, he was a captain in the United States Air Force. Died September 28th, 1997. Married to Rosemary. She died later, several years later, March the 4th, 2009. And if you're interested, you can go to YouTube and put in Rosemary Causey, and she's being interviewed in the front lawn by a news reporter, and her 2 young children are there too. A very nice family, very nice. So again, after an hour and a half of being questioned, Max is very surprised, I mean stunned, that he was chosen as a first juror. Now, when you're chosen to be on a jury in a case like a high-profile murder case that was going on then, you can just imagine, they immediately sequestered Max. So he had to go upstairs right off of the witness stand when he's being interviewed, escorted straight upstairs by the bailiffs. Now, when he gets up there, he's thinking, where's my toothbrush and everything I'll need? So Rosemary's contacted and she's instructed to bring a suitcase to the jail, which she does, and she's ordered to just drop it off. And then the bailiff brings up the Max, and he's got his personal items. But this jury quarters was actually an old jail cell, a jail area, a jailhouse area. Where he would sleep was a 7x7 room that had a toilet, a sink, and a light bulb hanging from the ceiling. There was a main room, they called it the coffee room, that you can go to, but for several hours, and I think actually about 3 days, it was only Max and the bailiff up there. And the bailiff would bring him newspapers, magazines, and take him to dinner. They would go to the Kirby restaurant downtown Dallas, which is still in business after 58 years. Still in business. And again, no contact, no phone calls with his family, none whatsoever, sequestered. And then finally, he's feeling discouraged and a little bit depressed. Who's going to take care of my family? He's worried about his children. Max paid all the bills, ran the household, did everything. He was quite worried. But after a few days, juror number 2 is finally selected. Number 2. Max is beginning to feel a sense of accomplishment. He's beginning to feel that they're going to get on with this trial now. And then I can go home and live life happily ever after. So now it's 2 or 3 jurors, and they're still waiting for everybody to qualify and serve in the jury. So after several more days, they finally select everybody and the alternates, and they're meeting in a coffee room, and Max excuses himself to go to the restroom. And while he's gone, they selected him as jury foreman. Again, Max was the first juror selected. He comes back from the restroom and he says, I don't want to do that. I don't want to serve. Somebody else do it. So they agreed to do a re-election, and they voted him in a second time. So he ends up serving. By the way, one of the jurors that served was a guy by the name of J. Waylon Rose, and there's interviews with him on YouTube too. J. Waylon Rose, very, very likable personality. He served on the jury too. Okay, so Max says in his journal he kept, his daily journal, which I'll link in the bottom here in the description, that he liked Belli. He thought he did an effective job, said he was a bright individual and very likable. But once the case was rested and it was handed over to the jury, they deliberated for 2.5 hours. 2.5 hours. They came back with a guilty verdict, and not only that, but sentenced Jack Ruby to death. And if you go on YouTube, you can put in the Jack Ruby trial, and you'll hear Judge Joe B. Brown Jr. reading the verdict. And he also says, signed Max E Causey, jury foreman. By the way, as soon as this happened, Melvin Belli went crazy and got before the cameras and called it the kangaroo court, everything else. But as we know, the trial was eventually overturned, or the verdict to not guilty, and there were plans on holding a trial for a second time in Wichita Falls, Texas, which is a little further north from where I'm at now, and very conservative too, that they were going to have a second trial. So what happens next is Jack Ruby dies of cancer, or not of cancer, he dies of a blood clot from having cancer, as a result of cancer. And that was January 3rd, 1967. So technically, Jack Ruby dies an innocent man. All right, so finally, everybody's cut loose. Max goes home, enjoys his life with Rosemary, lives happily ever after. Now again, I'm in rural Texas. I'm north of Dallas. This is a very, very, other than the traffic, this is a very quiet area. Very nice out here. I want to add this too, that I mentioned Jay Wayman Rose's name earlier. In some of his interviews that you'll again find on YouTube, he says, had Jack Ruby taken a stand and showed some remorse, Jay Wayman says, well, would have said, well, okay, that's okay, and they all would have packed up and went home. But Jack Ruby never took a stand. Max E Causey, I thought you'd like to know, and I'll see you at the top.